Yeah, so you told me not to really prep too much, but I think there's a pretty obvious topic that I can talk about for roughly forever.
Okay.
And it's definitely not what I would have expected I'd be interested in when I was younger. So visual storytelling in comic books. Um, Comic books get kind of a bad rap for being sort of an immature way of telling a story. And I think the immaturity comes from people seeing the pictures and saying, well, that's easy. Words are hard, pictures are easy. Um, and that's like a really deceptively simple way of looking at visual storytelling. Um, I think one of the things that surprised me most coming into comic books as an adult is how ruthlessly efficient visual storytelling can be. So, like if a picture is worth 1,000 words, and then you throw 5 pictures on a page times 20 pages. Oh gosh, that's 100 pictures.
It's 100,000 words.
Yeah, that's a novel. That's a novel's worth of extra information that you just threw into a piece of a story that you can read in 10 minutes. You just read a novel in 10 minutes.
And how long do you think it takes people to produce that versus writing 100,000 words then? Because it can't be easy to produce that.
Well, so part of it is that the effort gets distributed. And this actually might be kind of interesting to think about in terms of computers.
Mhm.
So a comic book writer will put together a script, and I'm mostly talking about standard, like you go to the comic book store and you buy an issue. Comic strips, like in a newspaper, would be different, and something that's fully realized as a 200-page story would be different as well. But like your monthly Batman.
And how long would those be? Just a general reference for people who don't know about comic books.
Oh yeah, yeah. So like a strip in the newspaper would be like a single page. It might be spread out into one line, like if you have an old-fashioned newspaper that you actually touch and feel and you sit there with your coffee on Sunday. Um, and then a longer, like a graphic novel, something that's fully conceived to be a story from beginning to end, self-contained, would be more like 150 to 200 pages. And normally you end up with monthly issues of something like Batman would be 20 pages. And then every 5 or 6 of those get put together in like a magazine. And that gets sold also as like a novel form. And experienced readers can get through one of those 150 to 200 page books in about an hour and a half. So it's very much like sitting down and watching a movie.
Yeah, so it's like it's efficient for the consumers, and you feel it conveys as much or maybe more information than a novel of the same length equivalent.
And what it's leaving out actually makes it a lot more engaging for the reader, because the experience of watching television or a movie can sometimes be very passive.
Mm-hmm.
And this is actually, I would say it's approaching more like a video game where you're doing the sound effects, you're doing the voices, you're doing the movement, and you're filling in the gaps between the images, which has a lot to do with like passage of time and sometimes spatial contrast. So it's a lot more engaging in some ways than watching a movie, but still a little bit easier and more efficient than just reading a novel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's like the spectrum. And I guess the video game point is interesting, is that I guess modern video games have become so movie-like and explicit, right? They've been criticized for just being so like, it's like a 3D CGI movie that leaves the kind of imagination out of it. Whereas an older game with crappy graphics, it's more comic book like this. You have to fill in more.
Mm-hmm.
So did you get into this, so you said you didn't get into comic books and visual storytelling as a kid. I mean, did you have any exposure to it as a kid, or did you just come in as an adult? And how was that process?
So I was from a town that was not quite big enough to have had an independent comic book store. And my primary exposure as a kid was that guy on The Simpsons, the comic book store guy. You know, worst comic ever. So I mean that was it wasn't really as available. The other issue is the benefit of perspective right now, looking back. I wouldn't have read any of the shit they were making in the 90s anyways. The quality of comic books has changed a lot over the last few years. Part of this is evolving visual grammar. Reading a story visually, there's actually linguistics here. I mean, you can throw people in an MRI and look at brain function while people are reading comic books, and there is a grammar, there are rules, there is structure, and it is something you have to learn how to do. It is different in different cultures. So like manga and Batman are actually written in a different visual language, and that's why some people prefer one over the other. So it's the other issue, is that it is difficult for me to read those comics that are written in the 90s because their grammar is so poor.
And is it because, I mean, is it an evolution as in like a generational thing? Like this stuff now is more sophisticated and for people in our generation because, you know, our generation has aged to the point where our peers are now producers and such. Whereas maybe in the 90s, it was kind of like a video game thing where that was just like something casual you made for kids. I mean, is that a case, do you think?
I think it's actually more a case of technology, because now the guy who's writing the book, and I started to mention this earlier, the guy who's writing the book can put the script together in like a week or two. Mm-hmm. And it used to be that he would have to write up the script and then mail it to the artist. Because I mean, they don't go to like the comic book office and all sit in cubicles and like pass their work back and forth. You have to imagine that most of the people doing these are working from home and working remotely with each other.
Yeah, so bring me through that. Yeah, let's talk about the whole workflow actually, because that's really interesting.
Right. So the way that it used to be is this guy would have written his script in a week or two, and then he would have sent it to probably an editor just to be like, okay, yes, we approve of Thor winning the fight against Dr. Doom or whatever is going to happen this week. And then it goes to the artist, and the artist is going to have to put together layouts, put together sketches. They're going to have to figure out a little bit of where the dialogue is going. And because of technology, at this point, there can be a lot more back and forth between the writer and the artist. And that is what has improved the communication in the stories. That's what's improved the grammar. Before, the time limit, it wouldn't have been allowed.
So you wouldn't get as much back and forth. And is there like a team of artists now? I mean, is there more than just the two people, or is, you know?
Yeah, so there can be. If let me build for you the largest possible team we could have. So you would have the guy who does the overall story, which is like the Avengers are fighting the X-Men, and then you have the guy who writes Avengers fight X-Men #1, and he writes the scripts. Then he sends it to a guy who does pencils. And that guy just draws the lines. He does the layouts. He may do a little bit of setup for where they think the text is going to go, but he's just doing pencils. Then they send it to somebody else who cleans up the pencils and does the inking. So only the black lines and the shading. Then you can send that to someone else who does the color flats, which is essentially setting up the digital file so that like Superman's cape is red in every panel and it starts out the same red. And if the artist wants to go through and do more subtle colors on that, it's set up for them. And that's like a really tedious process that you don't need to have you need talent for it, but you need like less discerning talent. People don't even get credited for that usually. So that's a color flat, and then it goes to the color artist who puts like the shiny stuff and the shading and the glistening and all of the details that make it like really exquisite to look at. And then it goes to the guy who does the text and the lettering, who figures out where the text is going to go and has to put it around the art, has to put it in the right order, has to put it so that you can follow who's saying what in what order, and then also consider the timing of it and sort of move your eye across the page without messing up the artwork. Yeah. And then that guy may also send it to someone who does design, who makes sure that the entire thing is cohesive and that like the cover feels like the inside, and that, you know, like all of the borders on everything match the overall look. Sometimes like the Batman logo for the title page, there's a guy like that guy does that too.
Cool. So
And there can be
digital. I mean, how in a modern process, how much is actually hand?
right now it's like all digital. And it has to be because, like I said, if you're the one guy who needs to get pieces of paper in the mail to do his job, I mean, like they might hire you, but they can only have you do like one book a month, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So there may be some people who still work like that, but they're not working full time like that. Or they're working
in-house. Like, I mean, in a big organization, are they all in-house in an office, or are they still remote?
No, they not only are they, I mean, they're the editors are going to be together in an office usually, but the artists and the writers are usually all over the place, and they may be working for multiple companies at the same time. They may be doing there's one artist who I love right now, Jamie McKelvey. He actually just did a music video. He animated a music video. That's obviously not something that Marvel paid him to do.
So these people are all freelance for the most part. They have like a home studio.
Pretty much, and they're not really making like maybe $20,000 to $30,000 a year if they're very successful. Like if it's a name that I know, they're being paid almost as much as a substitute teacher.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a whole they're getting no money from the movies either.
Wow. Yeah, that's like a whole other. It's like a whole other giant conversation about that.
It is. It's the process behind this, like the multiple layers and the cooperation and the multiple layers in the work. It's very like self-reflexive in a way that I wasn't expecting. Like I wasn't expecting the thing that you hold in your hand to so closely resemble who goes into it.
And is there an idea for like, you know, from a, you know, the different comics from the same company, do they, you know, do people try to, do the organizations try to impose like a house style, like in journalism? It's like, oh, if you all write for the New York Times, you should all kind of be in the style. Or is it pretty idiosyncratic amongst different artists because there's all these freelancers working for them?
Marvel and DC have both played with that at times. The New 52 in particular had a house style, especially for covers. And this may be like an immersion thing, but I go to my local comic book store and I help them sort through backstocks or just like piles of leftover comic books. And I can tell with like an inch of cover sticking out if it's going to be DC or Marvel. Just by like the colors and how thick the lines are, I can almost always guess with just like an inch. So they definitely are, it may not always be like a house style, but they're definitely very conscious of marketing, especially for the red versus blue there on the DC versus Marvel.
Yeah, I mean, the closest equivalent I think about this is, you know, Magic the Gathering when I was a kid, and it, like the art for that, right? And they would always credit the artist, right? The one who drew the whatever cards, and like each artist had. This is back in the old days where there were only like 100 cards, and there were like 5 artists, and you could tell they had each style. But now there's like 20 million cards, so I don't have no idea anymore. Maybe it's all done by machines or something now.
Actually, a lot of comic book artists still do that. Like. They do like art for Magic and for Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's a fascinating world. Yeah, I mean, the story, I mean, we started off talking about the storytelling part, but really we got into the whole end-to-end process. But, you know, I've heard about, there's this like, there's this book about like understanding comics, right? Like Scott McCloud. Yeah. I like people in HCI and human computer interaction, which I'm in design, always talk about that book, but I never actually read it. But we've, you know, because people have been talking about, even in, you know, nonfiction, right? How do you make good PowerPoint presentations? How do you make a good talk kind of thing? And taking elements from really compact visual storytelling and also like data visualization, or like how do you display data and tell a story in a convincing way?
I actually, I I wish that I'd actually wrote it down, but I was almost 100% positive we were going to end up talking about how you can use comic book layouts to improve your Excel spreadsheets. So
Yeah, or PowerPoint presentations or other things. Because like,
there's definitely it's definitely the same thing underneath.
yeah, and it's like it's interesting seeing how things from fiction translate to nonfiction, because it is obviously different, right? Because most of the stuff I deal with is nonfiction, right? It's like research or like engineering documents or things. But when when you go see a talk every week for like someone's research or someone's like giving a lecture and teaching and stuff, there are these storytelling elements that resonate with people, right? Like we resonate with things in a certain way, and if you're just presenting a bunch of dry facts, that's not gonna fly as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I resent your insinuation that Batman is a nonfiction. I don't know where you live, but Batman's real.
Yeah, sorry. Well, yeah, well, yeah, so do you feel like if you had gotten into this as a kid, you wouldn't have actually come to appreciate, like you wouldn't have come to like appreciate like you do now, because you'd always associate it with like childhood stuff? And is it better that you got into it as an adult?
It's difficult to say. I mean, I think it's especially difficult to say because I started reading, and maybe it's not just me, it's probably people our age, but there was less young adult stuff growing up. So I just kind of switched over to well-written adult novels in like second or third grade.
Mm-hmm.
So it's difficult for me to imagine if it had been that. Sorry, it's difficult for me to imagine that it would have been very different for comics, because I probably would have just started reading adult comics around the same time I started reading adult novels. But that said, going back to like the linguistic and the grammatical aspect of this, it actually takes longer to acquire the reasoning to do visual storytelling. Like there's a lot of I spoke to a few artists who specialized in like developmental psych and learning like illustration for children and trying to bring that into all ages comics, which are slightly different. And there is this issue of like you have to be a certain age in order to have a sufficiently mature mind to follow the visual storytelling.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And you would say that it's harder, I guess, than reading an equivalent adult novel. It's you would say that the same kind of level of storytelling, it's harder to understand. I mean, it's harder to acquire that ability to read in a comic, but you can do it much faster once you have done it.
Yeah. To give a specific example, I think this will really help is like the speech bubbles. So like if I've got my little bubble and it's got like a sharp point and then I've got my words up here, like no one tells you that that means I'm saying it. You just kind of get it. And then if it's like a little puffy cloud, you know that that's different. And then you can figure out from context pretty easily that I'm thinking it and no one can hear me say it out loud. So like the puffy thought bubble and the sharp speech bubble, that's like very close to like a Piaget structuralist thing. Like you can take 5-year-olds and they won't get it, and you bring them back like 3 months later and they all understand speech bubbles and like conservation of watering glasses.
Yeah, that's funny.
It's like a very, and no one sits you down and explains it to you, but you get it. And so, it doesn't even make sense to give a comic book to a kid younger than that. I mean, they may appreciate it. They may like looking at it. They may like someone else reading it with them. But like, you just legit can't read it yet. There's something in your brain that has to kind of click.
Yeah, this is way outside of what I know about. But like thinking about like kids with autism or autism spectrum, because it seems like being able to understand a comic is you have to be able to get into all these people's minds inside of these pictures. right? It seems like it's a really challenging thing. I mean, reading novels is also challenging, right? Because if you can't empathize or understand what people are thinking in their heads, or like if you're seeing a thing and you're like, what does this person know and what does this person not know, and then what does the audience know about them? And I'm sure there are people like child development people who do research on this about
Mm-hmm.
spectrum and stuff, and developmental psych and stuff. So it's interesting how that's like it's made me think from a research perspective, like it's something so compact, right? So seeing one page with several with a strip that's one page gives you so much information that you can study and stuff. Whereas like if you want a child coming from experiments to like read something, it would take them forever because they have to read a lot of pages of stuff and they can't like point to it, right? So if you can like show them a comic, they're gonna be like, oh, what do you understand? What is this person thinking? What is this person thinking? And stuff. Huh, this is fascinating. So yeah, I guess the other thing that we can talk about is like the multicultural aspect, right? That like that you know, I'm sure there are comics in other countries and you know, and they have both stylistically are different and also language-wise are different. So what are your thoughts about that? I mean, I guess have you been exposed to any of that in other languages or cultures?
Yeah, so there's I guess there's 3 main visual storytelling cultures I've been exposed to. What I'll just call American, continental, and manga. And this is actually, I mean, like I guess I can just go to Scott McCloud for this one. There's the different cultures have sort of a slightly different emphasis on maybe what information is most important. And the biggest contrast would be between like American and manga, where when you have Batman on your page, it's Batman says something, punch, other guy, react, other guy, punch. And it's very much verb, 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 verb. And the audience is filling in between the verbs. Like, how did he get from punch number 1 to punch number 2? Like, you imagine him rolling over. And it's also very much like maybe a little more cinematic in storytelling style. So it's very much like one scene, then change the setting and the location and the time, and next scene. Whereas manga, and it's mostly older stuff I've been exposed to because I've sought it out for expressly the purpose of experiencing something different. There's more visual space devoted to setting the actual setting, like the location, to like, you know, how it feels, how it looks. You may even have, you know, like a single flower in the middle of a fight scene, like, you know, panorama of the flight, flower, and then like just a sword. And it's a lot more abstract, and it invites you more to like fill in the verbs almost. Like it gives you all the other stuff, and you're more filling in like what actually happened. That's a little extreme, but like Scott McCloud actually puts together a histogram and shows that the distribution of, if you go through and naively classify panels in a book, you actually get completely different distributions. I would say, and then I said the other thing that I've been exposed to a little bit is what I called continental comics, which I would say are just notable for being more thematically varied. American comics are very much market driven, like, oh, Batman's popular, so let's try blue Batman. Okay, let's try white Batman and make him the Moon Knight. You know, let's try purple Batman and we'll make him gay. And they just like keep trying the same thing that works. I've seen a lot more weird stuff that like I'm glad I read once come out of but again, that may just be the stuff that comes from Europe that actually reaches me as reaching me because it's different.
Cool. Yeah, I have like a bazillion questions, but we got to wrap up somewhat soonish. So I guess my last one is I'll give you a toss up. You could either go in one or two directions. So my two main thoughts are, one, about consuming comics in paper form versus digitally, because now things are moving digitally, but there's it's like, what do people actually read on paper anymore? And the other is thinking about people doing this as a career versus as like a craft. That is there a sustainable way for people to do this, like an indie way, that people can actually do it as a hobby or a craft and sustain that? Or is this all becoming super corporate now? I mean, thoughts on either that or the digital paper thing? I guess they're related. It's like journalism, right? It's like everything's going digital and like no one can make money anymore, except you're like the New York Times or something. So I have ads everywhere.
So you're right. They are related. I'm going to throw out one piece of trivia that you probably didn't know. Comic book distribution is a monopoly. There is only one company in the entire country that is allowed to deliver Marvel and DC comics.
You mean physically distribute them?
Physically, yes.
Like deliver them and
like that is why you don't see comic books at Barnes and Noble the way that you wish you did. That's why they have like the novels, like the magazine forms, but you don't get Batman this month from Barnes and Noble because they do not have a deal with the monopoly that delivers them.
But you can get them in books, I guess.
Yes.
I see. Okay, continue.
So that's a whole interesting economic thing, that there's this secret monopoly that anyways, so digital versus print. There is a technological barrier that we still need to overcome with the digital, and that has to do with like aspect ratio and the fact that a good visual story could be panel in isolation, in which case there may be closer to like storyboards for like a cartoon. But a lot of the visual storytelling is in the gutters. It's in between the panels, and it's which panels you put next to each other that make you think about their connection. And in order to do that, you have to be able to see both panels at the same time. And in order to do that, you have to be able to see the whole page at the same time. And I do not have a cell phone or a laptop or a tablet that lets me see the entire page the size I want. And then related to that is also the issue of if you're looking at something digitally, you're essentially looking at like a picture of it. And our eyes do really awesome things when we perceive images. I'm thinking things like zooming in, like our brains can adjust for that. Like when you're holding a piece of paper in front of you, the font will actually appear bigger than it is like on a computer screen, because like your eyes can almost like selectively zoom in a way that they can't when you're looking at the digital image. It's actually something I've struggled with a lot, because I can get free digital copies to review and I hate reading them. I don't know, maybe the answer will be better printers, that you can just like order them digitally and then print them off to view, because like I said, the context and being able to perceive the entire layout at one time becomes really important in how you get the information. So
that's fascinating. Yeah.
So,
I mean, or like, or there's better digital ink, and like, we have floppy digital things that look just like paper.
So either they're not going to make comic books like they do now anymore, and it'll be more, they'll actually, and I've seen some artists do this where they keep in mind the fact that people are going to be trying to read this crap on their cell phones, and they like make it very simple. Especially webcomics. A lot of people do that because they know it's never going to be printed. But so much of the art of it is the overall impression, and it's the gestalt of it, or whatever. It's between the panels, it's in the gutters, it's running off the edges. So until there's a way to really duplicate that digitally, we're still going to have physical comics. Like it's different.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I'm just thinking that's one of the last vestiges of things we want actually a physical thing for, right? Because like as bookstores shrink, like a normal fiction book I can just like reading on my phone because it's just a stream of words, right? I can just flip through to my phone and I get the same experience. But yeah, when there's something like that, I think it's still going to be pretty hard to replace.
And I mean, like I can relate to that. Like there are some people who pick up a novel and like if they look at the margins and they're justified improperly, they're like, I can't read this.
Mm-hmm.
Or like I've definitely had that experience where I've just picked up a copy of a book and been like, this is ugly. Like I can't look at this for 6 hours while I read it. I need another copy.
Yeah, yeah.
But with comics, it's a lot more important even.
Yeah, because it's not just a stream of words. Yeah, because I think there are things that I can read on the Kindle on my phone. There are things that I can't as easily, right? And like just like a regular random novel that I pick up that I don't really care about. It's just like, oh, here's some fun airplane reading. I can just read on my Kindle really fast because it's just a bunch of words. Alrighty, I got to wrap up, but this is awesome. I wish we could talk for longer about this. So thank you so much. We'll go offline and then we'll chat a bit more. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thank you.